seminar for the Department of Linguistics at the University of Essex. Excited to have as a speaker today Victor Kuperman. Victor is a professor in the Department of Linguistics and Languages at McMaster University in Canada. Research normally focuses on psycholinguistics and quantitative linguistics, including things like eye tracking, eye movement behavior, and reading and sentence processing. But the paper we'll be talking about today is research that steps out a bit to look at the socioeconomic questions behind students doing research degrees in linguistics or undergraduate degrees in linguistics, and what they get from doing those degrees in the marketplace. So I think this was a really important paper that came out in Language a couple of years ago, and was really helpful for us, especially thinking about the current UK context and university and how we need to do our best to prepare our degrees for students. So today, Victor will give us a short overview of what's in the paper. I'll put a link to the paper in the chat here in case you want to follow along with that during the presentation. And then we'll have a chance to discuss and think about what the implications of this paper are for us today. So, Victor, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you very much for this lovely introduction, and thank you for having me. It's the first time this project is being discussed, so I'm extremely grateful for being invited to talk about it, because I like this project. Like you mentioned, like Joseph mentioned, it's very far away from what I usually do as a linguist, as a psycholinguist. But I'll tell you about the motivation in a moment. So this is work done together with my former master's student, Caitlin Battershaw. She graduated a couple of years ago, and indeed we published this in the section of the journal Language that is called Language and Public Policy. And again, there was virtually no discussion then, so I was pretty convinced this would be one of those projects that is published but disappears from the face of Earth. But thank you for proving me wrong. You will very soon learn that I'm not a labor economist. I'm not a social scientist, even outside of the linguistics domain. So I will talk about the hard evidence that we collected and analyzed. With the further discussion, probably most of my opinions will be just those opinions, right? Educated guesses at best. But still, we as linguists, we are trained to work with the data, and this is data. So that explains part of the foray into an unknown, uncharted territory for us, looking at the career choices, career trajectories, and incomes of people who graduate from linguistics degrees. Okay, so what is the most common question when you say you're training to be a linguist? And that's a question to you. When you say I'm a linguist or I am studying to be a linguist, what people do usually ask you? And I wonder if your experience is the same as we have in Canada. So I'll check the chat. What is linguistics? Okay, very good. And well, our number one question is how many languages do you speak? And then there's the eye roll and the annoyance, because it's not really about that, but still, yes. What is linguistics is a close second. But very often, once this sort of familiarity phase is over, what we are being asked is, what will you do with it? Okay. And that's really the question that, truthfully, we didn't have a very good answer to. Even though we're trying to give it when we are recruiting into our departments, and I'm sure yours is no different than mine, we have all kinds of job fairs and open house events, and of course brochures and websites that list potential careers. And some of them, some of the careers are listed here, and well, more or less to the right, you see the ones that are very, very commonly found. So you can work in education, or you can work perhaps in marketing. You can work in academia, and then there's some more exotic ones, like you can become a writer, and a degree in linguistics will help you, or you will translate for a living, or become an interpreter. Spy or working for the intelligence community is often mentioned here as well, or becoming consultant on legal matters. So ranging from sort of more common to more exotic, there's an entire slew of careers that we sort of put forward as possibilities for our graduates. Are they pursued? That's one other question that we wanted to ask. So the truth is that we know very little about the linguist's career path. What do our graduates do? Do they go on to continue education? Do they find jobs? What areas of labor market do we fill? Right? What kind of domains do we actually end up with, and how is this compared to the careers that we advertise? And also, we're asking what the income of linguistics graduates is like compared to having degrees in similar adjacent fields. So that's sort of the landscape of our questions. And I will very briefly walk you through the data, but really it's not a formal talk, so you're welcome to interrupt me, and it won't be long either. So let's view this as an excuse to have an interesting discussion about the topic. So for the presentation part, I'll specify the goals. We wanted to put numbers to Canadian post-secondary studies in linguistics as a career path. So what does it buy you to have this degree versus some other degree? And what does it buy you to continue your education versus not doing so? And another goal, which is lofty, but we hope to recommend some policies and research directions to the Department of Linguistics to facilitate a conversation, an honest conversation between ourselves, right, people who are in these departments as faculty or students, undergraduate or graduate, and other stakeholders. We have parents, we have faculty, we have administrators. So if we can shed some light on how we're doing, what we're doing in terms of preparing our students for future careers, this will be a better, if possibly bitter, conversation to be had. So what data do we have? All of this is steeped in the Canadian context. We use the Statistics Canada data. It's a statistical bureau of the country, the national agency that collects all kind of data from all kind of areas. This specific one, we're using the Educational and Labor Markets Longitudinal Platform from the Statistics Canada. Essentially, it's a record for every post-secondary student in terms of what institution they're affiliated with, what kind of courses they're taking. It's longitudinal, so it's tracking every person through their involvement in post-secondary education, and so giving us a chance to track the educational trajectories. Very importantly, it's a database that is linked to tax data. So if a person makes money in Canada, this money will be taxed, and the link will allow us to tie the educational record of that person with their income before and after the education included. So not just for the years of their university involvement, say, but years after or years before as well. Okay. So the tax data gives us, again, the income, but also the employment areas, meaning, so in very broad strokes, the tax data will tell us where a person ended up, in which domain of life, in which sector of labor market. So that's one data source. Another one is a database of career opportunities that we compiled from websites of all Canadian departments of linguistics and applied linguistics. So I probably should have checked your own website, but I'm pretty sure there will be some list of careers, and we definitely have the one at McMaster, and we would compile those across universities and take this as a comparator for advertised opportunities to be then checked against the actual sectors of labor market where the students end up. So there are obviously some constraints to the data. Some constraints are self-imposed, right? Others come with the data. So first of all, we only looked at undergraduate and master's students who have completed linguistics and applied linguistics degrees. So we don't look at those who are still in course. Right? These are people who have graduated. from either an undergraduate or master's degree in linguistics, plus some adjacent fields that I'll speak about in a second. We're not looking at PhDs and their fate because there are so just too few to track. It's Canadian information only, meaning that if a person moves to another country, either for education or for a job, we will not have the record of that person. Okay. The time range was the maximal that we could get the complete data for at the time. So the study was published in 22, and the data was collected a little earlier. But anyway, it's a period of 2009 to 2017, so pre-pandemic, pre-AI, if you wish, pre-Brexit, as we discussed in the few minutes before this talk. So this is another constraint, and I will say this more than once. We're looking at income as a major variable. It's not the only metric of success. I completely realize that, but it's the one that is clearly tangible and quantifiable, and one, frankly, that we care about as students, as parents, as educators. So with this in mind, let's look a little closer just at the structure of the educational system, post-secondary educational system in Canada. It will be different. It is different across countries. There's no doubt in that. So from completing the secondary school or high school, one can go several routes. One takes a person directly to the university degrees, which are painted and colored in blue here. So one can start a bachelor's degree of 3 to 4 years, then a master's degree between 1 and 3 years, a doctorate, and so on. Another possibility is to go to a college, which is typically 2 years, 1 or 2 years. But I guess there are some programs that are a little longer. If you are in skilled trades, you will go through an apprenticeship and then a college. And of course, with a college diploma, you can then also continue into a university education. Then there's only one province, British Columbia, that has the associate degree, and something in between the secondary and the university. We don't have to speak about it that much. Okay, so again, we're looking at the graduates from the bachelor's and master's levels, and they're slightly different routes of getting there. Now, another important data point, which is different between Canada and other countries, is that most linguistic students that we have aspire to be speech and language pathologists or audiologists. We don't have bachelor's or undergraduate degrees proper in these areas, right? Speech and language pathology or audiology is a master's professional degree, which takes in students from different departments. It could be linguistics, psychology, health science, and so on. These are coveted, right? And probably because they promise employment and typically deliver on the promise. So linguistics is one of the undergraduate degrees that prepares well for the prerequisites of the professional master's degree in speech and language pathology or audiology. Right? They typically have about 10% of acceptance rates, these master's degrees. Students who go through applied linguistics aspire to work in education, which is also something that requires a professional master's degree to teach in school in Canada. Okay. So I'll pause here. Let me know if you have any questions. Because this might be slightly different.
Yeah, to point out what we mentioned earlier that we do have, particularly the University of Essex, this is going to be quite a different factor in that our speech pathology training is done outside of the language and linguistics department. It's done in the health and social care department, and students do come in at the undergraduate level and they have a fairly intensive training to get certified and to be able to do that directly. And so that's a different pathway. And students who have that in mind won't be looking for our department. So it's really something important for us to keep in mind in some of the differences here.
Okay, perfect. Yes, that's great to know. And I know it's similar to what you said, Joseph, in the States as well. So Canada, I guess, is slightly different in this regard. Okay, so with this in mind, let's look at the Bachelors of Linguistics. Right. So in our data frame, and in our time frame, I should say, we have about 4,600 graduates total with a bachelor's degree in linguistics. And this is a diagram showing their educational paths. So again, in the time frame that we're looking at, more than half did not do any further schooling. So they finished with the bachelor's, moved on. Well, the 45% that did continue, the majority went to do a master's degree, so 20% here. And of course, these boxes are proportional in size to the percentages that I'm reporting to you. So 20% pursued a master's degree, not necessarily in linguistics, just some specialty. Another 14% did another bachelor's degree, which is essentially duplicating the effort, right? And extending the time and I guess the expense of staying at the undergraduate level. But another 10%, interestingly, went to a college, which is sort of a level down, if you wish, in this flow chart that we looked at. So they went back to a college diploma. So and 1% went to do a PhD, which would have been a bigger percentage if we had a broader time frame. We're just not getting information on the degrees that take a longer time to get to through the masters. Okay, so that's already interesting. I did not expect this many people to not continue their education. Let's move on to the masters. So what happens if you have a master's in linguistics in Canada? It's a little over 1,000 graduates total. 62% stop there and do not get any further education. Of the remainder, 21%, the majority, will go on and do a PhD. 8% will do another master's degree. 5% will do another bachelor's degree, and some other degrees, which I'm guessing are either in medicine or law, which would not be listed as PhDs. Okay, so there's a very substantial portion of our both bachelors and masters that do not continue their schooling. So it's important to know what it is that happens with them. We'll get to that. So now that we looked at the trajectories, let's look at the income. And the way to do it, we thought, was to, yes, we'll look at the linguistics and applied linguistics together, but it is important to also look at the competing degrees, right? Or I don't know if they're competing, but comparators, right? Degrees that our students often think about enrolling, right, when they're deciding between linguistics and some other field. These are often mentioned as alternatives. We also have the so-called double majors. So sometimes sometimes our students would either take courses or get majors both in linguistics and, say, anthropology, linguistics and English, and so on. So you see the spread here, and some of these, importantly, are in the humanities, like English and French studies. Some are in social sciences, like anthropology and sociology, and at least at our university, psychology is in the sciences. In some other universities, it's in the social sciences. So we're looking at different faculties, and the idea is to look at the annual income after taxes, which we corrected for inflation to be able to compare across the years. And we look at it as a function of three things: the program of studies, so which major are they? What is their degree in? Then we also look at the years out of school. That is, once you finish the bachelor's, this is your year zero, right? We're looking at your income at year 1, 2, 3, and so on, going forward. And we also look at educational pathways, meaning what happens if you do not continue your education after bachelor's, what happens if you do a master's, a college degree, and so on. So that's the breakdown that I will present to you right now for completed bachelor's. We have 5 panels here. Each represents an educational pathway from none, which stands for no further schooling, college, bachelor's, master's, and PhD. Now, linguistics is in, I'll call it green. It's probably turquoise or some other color that I don't know how to name, but but sadly, it's very easy to distinguish because that's the color that we'll find at the bottom of the income plot in almost every panel, right? If there's no further schooling, linguists do the worst in terms of their income, and the paper provides the actual numbers to it, right? What the gap is. Interestingly, these are the graduates with the French degree that do the best. Well, this is Canada, obviously, with a very significant and important francophone presence, so that plays into that. If our linguistic students, go on to do college, they're still pretty much behind. Sorry, and I should have mentioned, we have income on the horizontal axis, and we have year out of school on the horizontal axis. Income is on the vertical axis. So the progression from one year to another shows as a steady increase. So the more we work, the more we are in the labor market, the more we earn. But comparatively, again, linguists are the worst, quote unquote, in terms of income for no schooling, college schooling, bachelors. They're tied with, I think, anthropology, and again, French. French is doing the best. It's only in the master's degree and in sort of some years into the labor market that linguists do better and sort of overshoot the psychologists, which are the top earners in most areas. Now, for PhD, it's still not great, but even here we'll have to keep in mind that we only have 6 or 7 years after the bachelor's, so these are people who are still doing their PhD degrees. So this is the income while being a graduate student. So it doesn't really tell us much about their labor market. We would need a different metric for that. Okay, does it make sense so far? Please let me know if not.
Can I just ask a clarification question about when you say that students who do a linguistics degree then go on to do a master's, does this make a distinction between what topic their master's is in? Like, is it students who do linguistics bachelor's and a linguistics master's versus students who do a linguistics bachelor's and then say psychology master's?
No, there's no distinction here, and really, we just don't have enough data for that. So there are relatively few bachelors who go and do a master's, and if we were to break down that further, we would not have the statistical power for it. So it's any master's, and very likely some of those will be the coveted speech and language pathology, and some would be possibly computer science if they can get into that program. Some will be linguistics. Yeah, it's a mixture. It's a mixture. All right, very good. So moving on. So just to summarize, each year adds to income. That's reassuring. Interestingly, the non-trajectory begins higher. These are people who enter the labor force earlier, but it peaks earlier too. So going back, you can see how bachelor people who do a second bachelor sort of overshoot most of the individuals in the no schooling trajectory, even though they spent more years in schooling. So they were actually at the labor market for fewer years. Most importantly, linguists do worse than all competitors if they do not continue their education or if they do an additional college degree or bachelor's degree. So it seems like the secret recipe for relative success is to do a master's. And I will say here, not necessarily the linguistics master's. Let's do a similar exercise with the completed master's degrees. Right here, we have just 2 panels. Did not pursue further education, so done master's and left, versus pursued further education. So you will see that linguistics is more or less at the bottom of the income distribution for the no further education pathway. Here we're looking at years out of school, meaning after finishing the master's degree, not the bachelor's anymore. Okay, so linguists are tied with English majors. If you're wondering who earns the most, these are psychology graduates. Some of them will get a master's in clinical psychology and probably find a job nicely. And with speech and language pathology here with, I guess it's purple and diamonds, purple and triangles. Yeah. So these are the graduates from the speech and language pathology degree, the professional degree. Now, if masters pursue further education, then linguists are doing fairly well, and some years into the labor market, they catch up with both the speech and language pathologists and psychologists and so on. Okay, so it's a delayed process, and it requires a lot of education, right? Even postmasters, and that's where linguists catch up income-wise with the competitors. And I think that's exactly what I have on the slide here. So linguists do worse if they don't continue education. They do match and exceed if they do continue education after masters. So just to summarize, our baseline education that sort of we as faculty are responsible for in linguistics department does not translate into high income, comparatively speaking, comparative to even our neighbors on campus. To get to relative success, one looks at protracted, prolonged education with more and more degrees sort of piled up to get there. But apparently, we train good candidates for profitable degrees in other areas. So when people do go out and when they do pursue this further education, they definitely catch up. And I hope we'll discuss whether it's good or bad. I'll stop here and allow you to ask questions, if any, because then we'll be switching to a different subtopic.
So just to say, if anyone attending wants to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand or put something in the chat now if you want to ask a question at this point, and we'll have time for extended discussion at the end as well if you'd like to wait. But does anyone have a question they want to ask at this point?
Okay, I'll continue, and yeah, you're very welcome to ask me later. So what do we advertise as careers? We're now moving to that database that we compiled from the websites of the universities. And the interesting metric here is the percent of universities that mention a certain career. Now, of course, we needed to organize the free-form data in some way. So we mapped those advertisements against the so-called National Occupational Classification of Canada, just to make sure we put things into bigger buckets that are comparable across universities. So everyone agrees, like 80% of universities say that you can become a teacher of some description, school teacher, or you can become an audiologist, speech language pathologist, or translators, terminologists, and interpreters. Authors and writers are pretty strongly there. Over 60% of universities advertise that. University professors and lecturers, journalists, which would align more with your reality, I guess. And you can take a look at what else is mentioned there: editors, college instructors, and so on and so forth. Okay, so to me, it's a very recognizable picture. Our stuff is pretty much the same, or used to be the same at the department as what I'm showing here. Now, here's the data that comes from the tax returns, right, which gives us the income, but also a broad category for where people are working. And here we're looking at percent of graduates with the linguistics bachelors. And an important breakdown is into the black bars and the gray bars. The black bars are for those who did go on after the bachelor's and did something else, so some other further education. Gray for those who did not. So you will see that educational services is actually the most popular for both these categories. That's the area where most of our graduates go, but it's so much more common, like twice as common among those who pursued further education. So 30% as opposed to about 15%. Partly that's because that teaching in school and teaching in some other educational institutions requires a professional master's degree. You would not be allowed to do that without it. And the rest is fairly grim in the sense that, well, these are things that don't always require a degree, let alone a degree in linguistics. There are exceptions, of course. So food services and drinking places, that's the second most common area where bachelors without further schooling end up, right? Administration has a little more traction of provincial and territorial public administration with those who pursued further education, but not that much with those who did not. So you will see a long list, including, clothing stores and retail and food and beverages and accommodation services and real estate, social assistance, ambulatory healthcare services. So it's a very well spread distribution of sectors of the labor market. Again, only a fraction of them can be sensibly related to the education that we're giving. Admittedly, administration might require languages, healthcare, definitely some of the areas, including speech and language pathology and audiology, do rely on linguistics training, but not all of those do. So moving on from that, some actual industries match what is advertised. That's certainly true for education and education and teaching, healthcare, hospital settings. We hardly ever find translators, interpreters, authors, and writers, even though the classification would have a niche for that. It just very few people end up in highly advertised careers. So again, with no schooling, mostly our graduates end up in food services and drinking places, industry, admin and support services, and so on. Further schooling, most popular educational services, public administration, and healthcare. So let's bring it all together. I promise I won't speak for too long. What would our recommendations be with this newly found knowledge? First of all, we need to align career pages with statistics on what careers our graduates are actually pursuing, right? I'm speaking specifically about Canada and the Canadian context. It might be that the situation is somewhat different in the UK, but still, whatever the reality is, we need to make people aware of it. People as in future students, current students, parents, and so on. We need to make known the probability of being accepted into the degrees that are very, very coveted. Right? So for speech and language pathology, it's roughly 10%. And obviously this should inform the decisions that our students make going in. Ideally, we would make known the financially optimal educational trajectories within linguistics, which in this case would be a bachelor's degree followed by a master's degree, and ideally a master's degree outside of linguistics. We need to inform students about potential prospects in other programs. And here's a sticky point, which we recommend, but not necessarily know how to implement, right? It would be great to revise our curricula in such a way that confers the skills that at least the majority of students who will enter the workforce immediately at graduation, that will make them more marketable and more competitive in the labor market. So I'm saying all of this, fully realizing that I'm a professor at the Department of Linguistics the Department of Linguistics and Languages. Most likely, implementation of these will lead to a further drop in our enrollment, and that's not great. It might even defeat the purpose. But equally, so if we're transparent and accountable, this information needs to make their way to the decision-making stakeholders. Again, parents, educators, and students first and foremost. Now, to perhaps prevent to answer a question that will probably be asked, yes, I do think that other programs need to do the same. And if someone else, like anthropologists, ask me, I would do the same kind of analysis for them and give them the rundown, because I'm pretty sure that the problems that we're looking at are not unique to our degree. Just that even with similar degrees, we tend to not be doing that great. Okay, and I'll stop here, and I thank you, and I apologize every time I sort of speak about this, because it doesn't bring a smile to anyone's face, starting with mine, right? that's what the data is. And so let's talk more about it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Victor. So if anybody does have questions or comments, feel free to raise your hand or use the chat or use the Q&A, and I'll either read your question or let you ask it yourself. I mean, I think it's really helpful to have this data. I mean, we know that there are many reasons why students may choose to study linguistics and languages or not. But to actually get some insight into what's happening, I think is really helpful versus just guessing in the dark and or on the other hand, just saying whatever we think will get students through the door, whether it's actually good for them or not. So I think this kind of data really helps us to be honest and move towards a situation that's good for us as a department, but also benefits the students who are really the core that feeds into what the department is. Let me go ahead and let my colleague Charlie ask his question. So go ahead, Charlie.
Hi, can you? Oh,
I can hear you, yes.
yeah. Well, yeah. Is this okay? Um, yeah. So, thanks for the talk, and yeah, it's really interesting. I'm curious about the other. Did you all try to look at other sort of comparators outside of maybe the humanities, social sciences kind of areas, like business or I'm always curious to see what these trajectories look like in the disciplines that students and parents more typically think of as leading straight to a good career path. Because I know at least from some things that I've seen that, business doesn't necessarily like, get you a great job in business where you get paid a lot of money, but other things like mathematics may have a different kind of trajectory. So, and oftentimes our students are choosing between those. Certainly their parents are, when I talk to them, are sort of pushing them between like, do you want to do this more humanities, social science type thing, or shouldn't you just go to something that has a very like obvious career attached to it?
Good question. Thank you, Charles. No, we haven't looked directly at those. There's plenty of work at the faculty level showing that humanities lag behind. Is typically humanities and social sciences doing a little worse than other faculties, but it is entirely true that business and these days, who knows, maybe even computer science students are not doing that great after graduation in the AI era. So no, we haven't looked at it, and mostly because we were basing our choices on asking our undergraduate students, right? When you were deciding, right, what were you deciding between?
Hmm.
And mostly they would name another humanities or social science discipline,
Hmm.
right? Few people who can reasonably consider mathematics would go into linguistics,
Hmm.
and probably vice versa.
Great. Thank you.
What is about changes that you've actually been able to make? I mean, you mentioned that obviously changing curriculum is, a long-term and difficult way to sort of address needs that actually could be changing and fluctuating, and so it's a difficult path to go down. But you said something about the way you advertise things on your website. Have you been able to update and change what you communicate to students about their expectations and why they may want a degree from your department?
We did a little, right? So we didn't go as nearly as far as as I proposed, but we changed. We definitely changed the language there, and so we highlighted the careers that are the ones that are more often ending up as the careers for our students. And of course, in out of self-interest, we would still highlight those that are linked in a clear, direct way to linguistics training, as opposed to say food services, which is not perhaps. But yeah, it's still a conversation that is happening. So do we do what we preach? Not fully.
Yeah, and have you talked to any students about these numbers and whether this is like a real factor for them in terms of what they decide to do, or they're going to study something because they're passionate about it, aren't necessarily concerned about the likelihood of getting a particular position in the workforce?
um, we do talk about this mostly with graduate students, quite frankly, and this is because it's an easier forum to reach out to, right? It's much easier to get together graduate students in a program and deliver any message than to do so with undergraduate students over 4 years. So I'm not certain that at the undergraduate level, this message is received and known. Yeah, generally, anecdotally, students do care about these things. They do care about the careers and the future careers and employability and stuff of that sort. Yeah, it's an open question. I would welcome suggestions how to reach out to undergraduate students. Right? Posting a link to the paper won't solve it. Right? They won't read it.
I'm not sure everyone wants to dig through all that data, especially if it's they're not sure exactly how it applies to them. I mean, I was struck by when you're looking at the like work sectors, the jobs that people go into after linguistics, that only the education sector was at 30% and everything else below 10%, which one way of looking at that is that's an extreme diversity of options after a linguistics degree. So on the one hand, there's not a clear goal, but I mean, this makes you think of recent conversations with parents and prospective students around like open days and should they study. And you clearly get some students and parents who come in and have this very specific idea of what role they want to see themselves in and how do I get from A to B as quickly and cheaply as possible because
Mhm.
this is what I want to do. But there's also students who are young, they're teenagers, they're not sure what they want to do, they're not sure what role they want to have, but they don't want to, but they do want to do something to improve themselves, to contribute, to get new experiences, to develop, to see new opportunities, and then they have a passion around languages, or maybe they've gotten into sociolinguistics somehow or gotten into translation, and that will motivate them to continue to learn and work without a specific job. And there's actually on the one side, you can say, oh, well, you don't know what you're going to do with it. On the other side, we can tell them, well, you're not pinned down into doing one thing. You're not deciding your future now. You're exploring options while engaging in a topic that you're passionate about. I wonder if that's a helpful way to frame these things for students who aren't sure if linguistics is for them.
It is. It is absolutely. Uh, it's a common discussion that we had with Caitlin, my co-author and former master student. This is data that might be very, very convincing for a very determined, very specific mindset, right? Of indeed considering a university degree as an investment, right? As something that needs to lead to a successful career and so on. Definitely not everyone is like that as a student coming into the university, and it's good that it's not like that. Otherwise, we will become more and more of a service providing a commodity. I like very much your way of phrasing it, Joseph. Right? There are opportunities. They're not linked to just one peg.
Yeah, and then at the same time, we can continue to think about how do we help students find ways to translate these skills to things that are in their interest in the long term as well. If there's any final questions or comments, okay, we'll go to Charles. You got another question here, and then try to wrap up after that question. But let's go with Charles's question.
Yeah, I just wanted to like join in on the conversation. I think I'm
Mhm.
curious about the granularity of the data in terms of like, are we able to pick apart, not just thinking of like the group as a whole, but for those ones who are more successful, like what is their, um, do we know anything about their other background data, or is it very minimal, like just what they, because I'm thinking in our department, we always encourage, I feel like I'm constantly like badgering students to please study other languages in addition to studying linguistics, especially being in a department that offers both. And you all might be doing the same, but I wonder for some of these subsets, like, is it the case that if you're a linguist who happens to study French, that suddenly you're on a completely different trajectory? And that's just a minor sort of change that I mean, studying French is not minor, but like, it's like it's doable within the system, within the department, but is a pretty easy change to make.
Yeah. Great question. No, so we don't have a breakdown of courses that they're taking.
Hmm.
So in that sense, we cannot pin down, the skills or the coursework that would make one student more competitive or more successful than the other. I will say that what we can do and did do is look at those who sort of end up with a higher income, and mostly these are bachelors in linguistics and masters in something else, right? Masters in speech and language pathology, masters in computer science or data science or something of that sort. From which we can sort of infer that probably we trained them enough during their bachelors for them to make that leap, be that with the computational skills or with the developmental, whatever the speech and language pathology programs care about, right? Knowledge about the language development and impairments and so on. So, but that's that's an inference. Yeah.
I mean, I guess that is related to what you see in other. I'm just thinking about my own undergrad experience, and pretty much everybody that I met in English, in the English department, in the philosophy department, in the classics department, they were all planning to go on to law school. So I'm sure that their ultimate departmental earnings numbers looked excellent. And really, it was the existence of law school and the fact that the United States doesn't have undergraduate law degrees as an option that, without that, I think those programs would have been massively smaller because it was the thing that was allowing people to study what they wanted to study while still feeling comfortable about their career path. They can study philosophy knowing that, yeah, this is just, there were also philosophers planning to go on to med school that I met. So, which is always a nice, interesting combination. But yeah, that does sort of change how you think about what you're getting out of your degree and what your plans are.
Yeah, great comments. I agree with this. It looks like we're a good bouncing bar, right?
Yeah.
We're a good pathway to other careers. Yeah.
I mean, it's probably something we can think about as a department as well, is how well do we structure our training so that those options into moving to other disciplines are actually still open, or are we sort of just getting down into narrow topics in linguistics that don't translate as well to other topics that students might be interested in the future? So I guess it's another thing to consider. So yeah, that's a lot to consider, and obviously we'll have these conversations over and over again with our departments as we consider how things are going. We are getting near the end of an hour, so I don't want to take up anyone's time too much, but thank you very much, Victor, for putting this presentation together and starting this conversation. As I mentioned, we've been talking about this topic leading up to your presentation, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it again. We have a meeting coming up next week where this will probably be another topic. And so thank you very much for helping us start thinking, and hopefully this stimulates thinking in other university departments as well.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the invitation.
Thank you everyone for joining
Thank
as
you.
well.
Perfect.